Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are joined by Wavua Mwambonu, who is a Kenyan filmmaker and storyteller who is really passionate about food, culture, and how it shapes our lives. Her work primarily focuses on where food comes from, the people behind it, and how food connects to wellness, environment, and even opportunity, especially across East Africa. She is the creator of Everyday Food Stories, and it's a multimedia project that highlights food systems and the people transforming them. And she spends a lot of time documenting these change makers, exploring food culture, and helping people rethink what healthy and sustainable eating can look like today. We are really honored to have her presence with us today, and we hope that you will enjoy today's session. Hi, Babua, how have you been? Thank you so much for joining us
Hey,
today.
thank you so much for making the time for us to do this. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, how's your day going so far?
It's a Sunday, so it's very relaxed. Actually, I was just going to mute my phone because I realized we're doing a recording. But yes, it's a very quiet day, and yeah, and very relaxed and sunny. Very, very, very warm.
So we were talking a lot about climate recently, and also we were talking a lot about the kind of work that you do. And you had shared a lot of videos of your work, and particularly the one that really stayed with me is about the Ol Kokwe Island and the Lake Baringo and how the whole issue of overpopulation. So I had no prior knowledge about this, so I was definitely really shocked to see that this was something that was happening around the world. And it also made me feel extremely ashamed because I did not know of this. And then we also were talking about how similar issues we face in our countries, which is, in Kenya and also in India, and just a lot of Asian and African nations face very similar climate issues. So, for those who are unfamiliar with this situation, could you please describe what's happening in the sinking islands of Ol Kokwe and how this climate change that has been going on so rapidly has kind of led to rising water levels and everything else have kind of affected the life and especially the livelihood of people, particularly fishing, which is, as you mentioned, is also the main um, way of living for people.
People who might not be familiar actually just was really not knowing. Uh, I also did not know about this particular community say 1 year or 3 years ago. So Ol Kokwe is an island on Lake Bari in Kenya, and it's one of the lakes in the Rift Valley region of Kenya, the Rift Valley. So what has been happening over the past couple of years is that there has been rising water levels across the lakes in the Rift Valley region. And with the water rising, there has been a lot of physical displacement and also livelihood disruption. And what could happen is, so there has been speculation about the reason that water is rising from something geological happening underneath the Rift Valley, and but also there have been also climate change which has been going on, and different people are giving different reasons for why the waters are rising. But on this island, on Lake Baringo specifically, there are the people who are called Gens, and the Gens are part of the Ma community, Ma speaking community. Most people know the Maasai, but also they have a similar dialect, and they were once nomads, but then they ended up settling on the lake, and their main livelihood is fishing. That's all they depend on. Their children are born on that island, and they depend on fishing. They are also quite marginalized. You're talking about an island with a population of over 1,000 people, and on this island, there is no electricity, there is no running water, and also sanitation in terms of toilet is not there because I actually slept on the island for a few days and got to experience all these things that were happening to the community. And now, because most of the community, actually, they're not the only community living around and depending on Lake Baringo, but they are highly dependent on it, having being on the island. The Turkana people, the Tugen people, living around the island and also depending on Lake Baringo for their activities. But they're also very affected, right? With the rising waters, they have submerged home schools, actually on that particular island, part of it has now split into two. So the school that the students go to, it's split, and now they have to access it using a boat. Whereas previously school just walk the school. So there's the merging of all these things, and like it's becoming very difficult for the people. And especially now, even the women whom I wait to film. I don't know. Do I explain a little bit about the women? When we went over there, for the first time, I went with a different team. Bifadal, who's a full fanatic fisherman, and he was documenting fish species and how endemic fish species, indigenous fish species, are disappearing across rivers and lakes in Kenya, and how that shows the crisis that we are undergoing with the water in our country, So when we went there, we went to record all these fish species. There was Baringoensis, or the different tilapias and the catfish and what was going on with them. And while we were there, we were told about this very successful fisherwoman, and we wanted to see her laterally. And when we met her, the situation was very different. And now she was telling us that she is no longer successful, because the so previously they could catch fish, and now there's no fish in the lake. There's hardly any fish in the lake. There has been a lot of overfishing. So she and they are no longer able to depend on the fish. And she's a community leader. Her name is Sarah. So when I meet her, I remember we were documenting how she's a woman who's strong and holding on to her dream, her livelihood, and her culture. But then as time as we continue interacting, I learn more about her and the group of fisherwomen that she's spearheading, and they're trying to get into a boat race at the end of the year. That was last year. So they have a boat race each year in that community, and it just unifies everyone from around the lake. They come together once a year, and they get to do this competition. It's a sort of peace initiative, because this place is also very it's it has been affected with a lot of war because of the resources over there, how they're little and everything. So you find that there has been quite a lot of conflict. So fish the boat racing has been a way to unify the different communities. And this community is coming from a very patriarchal space. They were being barred from participating in the boat race. The men did not just understand why they needed to participate in the boat race. It was not in their minds at all. They did not feel like it's important for the women to be included. The committee was full of men, and so they did not include them. So by the time we get there, they're not being participate. And their hearts are quite broken, because at that particular point, there was no fish in the lakes. They're hardly earning anything. They have families. We're talking about like around 7 children per person, 4 to 7 children to support, in school fees, eating and everything. And they're just not able to provide for their families. And they're worried. They don't want to leave their homes to go and become low-level workers in other places, what Sabra kept saying is she does not want to go and be a maid in someone's house when she has so much resource that she could work where she is and make a living for herself and her babies. So at this particular point, they are really, really, really sad, because they cannot participate in the boat race. It's something that was offering hope from their situation. They just wanted visibility for their plight. They also wanted to be able to have a new form of livelihood that could supplement the fishing, which was not bringing in any money. And so that's what the documentary became about. It became about these women who are barred from a boat race, and they're fighting for visibility as their way of life disappears, and they want to claim visibility. They want to take up space. So that's what the documentary now is about. It focuses on this fight for visibility, a fight for survival, but also to try and restore their future as women of Ol Kokwe.
It's just so interesting how climate and gender are so interconnected. and how even during this time when this lake is facing like extreme case of overfishing, and there, as you mentioned, like no fishes, there's still like this patriarchy works in such an interesting way. Like even there, the men or the women who are very patriarchal in nature want to have this sort of space. And definitely, I think through like this event and through this festival, this boat festival that you mentioned, I think this would mean so much for these women to be able to, fight for themselves and also be able to represent their voices. I also don't remember if I'm incorrect in this, but I think in one of our earlier calls, you had mentioned that women primarily do a lot of fishing in that lake. Is that right, or am I getting this wrong?
Yes, technically they do. So so technically across so many lakes and rivers, there have been it's not been normal for a woman to fish, yeah. And even in the community, it wasn't normal for a woman to work. The belief was that a woman should stay back home, and the man brings in the fish, the bread, and provides, But then, because of all the conflicts it was bringing, with women being very dependent on the men for everything, so Sarah started teaching the women. So these women are actually highly trained. They're coxswains, yeah. These are highly trained drivers of boats. It's called a what, 1500 horsepower. Yeah, I need to confirm that. But yeah, they're really highly trained in the art of driving the boats. It's almost like a car. Yeah, so they're not just fisher women using the traditional cullet, which is what they use over there, the rafts, but they're using the modern boats. Yeah, and Sarah was training these women to become fisher women, to become independent women, so that they would be able to have a livelihood of their own, reducing the conflict in the family. So over time, more and more women started joining their men to provide for the family by fishing. And the fishing, you fish overnight, you're in really rough waters. It gets really shaky. At some point, we were caught in the waves, and it can get really scary. So you have the women joining their men and actually fishing so that they can provide something for their families. And this has been a shift. I think we had a conversation at some point about how also in India there was the Mala community, and there was the issue with caste and gender and how it was affecting their livelihood. So it's similar over here, in that you have the layer of marginalization. So they are quite left out when it comes to development. And then the second layer now becomes the layer of gender, in that community it is not common for a woman to be the one making certain decisions, and make these big decisions about provision and things like that. But now the women have also taken up space, and are joining in the provision of the family, because they understand the importance of having a future, not only as a woman, but also for their children as well. Yeah.
As you had mentioned about fishing being the primary source of income for people, so it is definitely people are dependent on it. So when did people start realizing that it was no longer sustainable? Like, and what factors made the situations worse? As you mentioned, like women traditionally were not in these spaces. So when did like overfishing and also the lack of doing this or depending on fishing also lead to women being more involved in order to kind of provide more for their families? Like I'm trying to understand, when did this change happen?
So you have a lake where you have an island, and it's not the only island. They have like seven, but it has the highest population. There's Pamalok, there's other islands which are very touristy. So you have a situation where you're being born and you're going into the water as a fisherman or fisherwoman. Your children are also going to depend on that same water, your children's children, because for the longest time, a lot of them have not been highly educated. It's just right now when we went there, people were talking about there was this kid who was sponsored to go to the US on a scholarship. And it was such a big deal. So it shows you that this does not normally happen, yeah? And also Sarah, the main character of our documentary, was actually the first lady to complete class 8 studies on the island, yeah? And so for her, education is really important. And even her children are also educated beyond Form 4. So you have a lot of the people on the island getting to Form 4, and then, you have that there's no continuation into university, or they go into university, but then due to lack of job, they just stand back there. And over there's not that much opportunity on the island. There's only one clinic, I think two schools, two very small schools, public. There was a fish factory that closed down. And then the hotels, because of the rising water, there's not much work, but also it's not the kind of work where they're getting high level work. You're getting maybe a watchman, a gardener at the hotel. So then they're not getting the good jobs, they're not getting highly educated. So again, fish becomes what they depend on, and also being tour guides to the few tourists that are coming to the island or to the lake. Yeah. So, so over time, when we went there, I remember the fish was so tiny; they were the size of my hand. Actually, my hand is quite big. Yeah, the tilapia. So they went from being really huge to being the size of my hand. And this is because of overfishing. So because there was so much overfishing happening, because that's all they're depending on. It's a structural issue, systemic. So you're all depending on that. So as a result, they're catching even the fish before they're mature. And over time, the fish started getting smaller because you're catching them so early. So even in their, lifespan, they mature early on because they're being quickly grabbed before they've even matured. So the fish became so tiny, and now you can't even depend on it because, the bigger the fish, the more you're able to sell it for. So if the fish is so small, it means you're selling it for maybe 10 shillings. 10 shillings is what, $0.1, quite little money over here. So if you're selling the fish for 10 shillings, 20 shillings, 30 shillings, that means and 100 shillings, and you have a family of 7 people to feed. That means you're not making enough money to be able to sustain that. And over time, that unsustainability where the family, the livelihood is one, it's not supporting the family. The fish is also under strain because that's all you're catching, too many of them. So over time, it becomes, smaller catches, long hours. So there's less return for all that fish you're catching, and then it becomes a burden. So that's how it started becoming. Actually, by the time we were going there, the fishing department had issued do we call it a warning? Yeah. So there were some people who are not even allowed to fish because they were catching all the tiny fish, further depleting. And, the fisheries, they're trying to add some seeds so that we can have more fish in the lake. So they need to be given time to grow. But also the community is under so much financial pressure, so they cannot afford to wait. And they're very dependent on pouring aid, pouring food. So if the government does not provide aid in terms of food, they're one of the communities that are horribly affected by the drought. So that means that most of them are starving. They're going for days without food. So if you start looking at it from that particular lens where there's the marginalization, which is leading to a lot of financial and economic stress, which is now also leading to now the overfishing and things like that. So you can see the link between all of this. So, and as a woman, you can't just stay home. Your children are going hungry, they're crying. Of course, you start looking for other things to do. And that's what even gave the women morale. They wanted to do the boat race. They want to do a water sport because in their head, the Olympics is something. They've seen it on the TV. They're like, we've seen people going to compete in other places. So maybe we can do this as well. Maybe we can do water sports and people can come watch, or we can go to other places and be exposed, because we are also speaking about people who have never been past a particular point in the country, most of them within the county, so Baringo County. So most of them, maybe they haven't been beyond Nakuru, which is just a few kilometers away, 1 hour away. So they also want to expand their horizons and go beyond the lake and see what else lies out there. They also want their children to have a future where they're not just fishermen. They have good jobs so that they can also be able to support the community back home to rise. So these are some of the things. And also this lake, it's slowly sinking. So who knows if in the next 5 years or 10 years it will still be there. This island might have sunk like some of the islands. So there's also that danger, and they do not know what the future looks like. So that that's also part.
That's really interesting. When you mentioned about the boat and boat race and this event, what was the main reason behind that? Like, why is there a reason why the women decided that they wanted to do like a boat festival? Is it to have like more people come to the island and see it, or like, also from like a very economic tourist lens? Like, is this also one of the reasons why?
So the boat race is actually organized by the county government. It was an aim to increase tourism in the area. Now, the government might also have its own issues because the event is a bit underfunded at the moment, and it's also competing with another event which has been given priority because it's about selling livestock, which is it earns more money than the boat race. However, with the boat race, for the women, what they're thinking is that since the fish is not dependent, what's the next closest thing they have? Of course, they have so many dreams, they would love to have a solar fridge, or rather a cooling area that is solar powered, so that they can be able to store things like catfish, which are still in plenty at the lake, and thus they can be able to sell beyond Marigat, which is in Baringo, and it's a big market. So they want to sell beyond there so that they can sell them for much more, earning more for the same fish that they are, for the same catch that they're earning right now. They can be able to earn more. That way they're able to have some savings. They have, some of them would want to try things like market gardening and garden a few plants because the island is quite rocky. So we are talking about a place that does not have as much land to farm, but they want to try all these alternative livelihood things that could just add to their pockets, to their finances. But the boats, it's the one thing they have. They own their own boats. It's right. The water is free, so riding the boat on the water is free. So the only thing that you're buying is the fuel, right? And for them, it's like, okay, they're already tourists. So what if they can be coming here to watch this thing? And it's just a really good idea for them. It's a sports thing. They're also thinking, oh, we've seen in other places they even have competitions. What if we can also go and compete there? Maybe even win something, win some money, and be able to invest that back into our projects at home. So these are the sort of mindsets that they have. So it's not like they're just sitting there and being like, we want the government to just help us. They're like, we have these ideas. All we need is support from the government, the NGOs, or other partners who can come on board and help push this project that we're doing.
That's honestly a great idea, because with limited resources, this is one of the ways that they can, be able to reach more people. As you've spoken about the government and also, like policies, and has there any changes or anything done through like policymakers, or like any local efforts that have been made by the government towards the community? You've also mentioned like this whole boat event is like funded and like led by the government, so, and it's currently underfunded. So what else has been done towards this? Because I'm sure this is not a sudden issue, this has been going on for a while.
Or what?
Yeah. So has there been any policy changes or policy?
So, so I also asked that question when I went there. I was asking, how come the fish? So the thing about during the event, we actually had the politicians come and say they were going to resurrect the fish factory that was right there. But the thing about politics and even policies is the execution of it all. You can have such rosy policies on paper, but it's how they are executed. So there is even climate policy, climate committee. We even had the president talk about putting a couple of billions towards communities that are affected by drought. But then most of the time, this money usually ends up in the pockets of a few individuals, right? So, and also when we're talking about marginalization, this is one of those communities where politicians only get there during campaign times. So we're heading into a campaign season, right? And we are going to see a lot of politicians going that campaign, and then after that, they're gone. And our main character, the son, is actually looking to vie for a political seat as an MCA because they haven't had a political figure from the island. They've mostly been people from the mainland, so they hardly ever get to the island. And so their problems remain unsolved. They do not have a beach management unit, so they're not able to have a fish market over at the island. They have to depend on the one at the mainland. So this is some of the things they are looking to do on a very executionable level, because even if I talked about all this policy, climate policy, what policy, but then it's not really translating on the ground. And I think there's a gap right there. So it's just that the leadership is not that good in terms of that. But also, if I was to talk about the event itself, yes, it is funded by the government, but there is space for improvement, lots of space for improvement, because we're talking about an event that was hardly marketed. Actually, we got there and then only to learn that they had decided to push the dates ahead. So you can imagine if you had tourists flying in to come and attend the festival only to have the dates pushed ahead, and you've only booked maybe 2 nights to come and experience the festival, and then to have it pushed ahead just just from nowhere. We actually got there and we were like, oh, actually it's good you've gotten here, you've just missed the meeting. They just pushed the dates to by 5 whole days, and now we are stranded as the crew because we'd only planned to stay 3 nights and now we have an additional 3 nights. So it's a really, I would say there's a lot of space for improvement. That starts with the leadership, not ignoring this particular sections. They invest a lot into the livestock, a bit into the livestock, which are also very affected right now by the drought. But there's a lot of space because there's so many things like having the solar powered cooling rooms, so that the fish can be stored there and transported to bigger markets so that they can earn more. Training for alternative livelihoods, they have the beadwork, same as the Maasai. So these are things that can earn them money if they are really marketed nicely. They have the hot springs. There was some clay I got from the hot springs that can do really nice skincare. So there's a lot. They have goats, in as much as their cows have mostly died from the drought. They now have, actually, that area was quite popular. So the lake, long ago, before the drought, when the cows were plenty, they used to swim their cows from the island to the mainland. Yes. And it was quite a tourist attraction. And actually, that's the person that we went with for the first trip. His name is Sham. He kept telling me about the swimming cows. So that's what made us go there the first time, because of that phenomenon, because it's quite unique. But right now, they do not have any cows to swim anymore because, again, climate change. But also, there have been no interventions to help the island, to conserve the island, to restore it. The neighboring island, Pomolok Island, which was one of the islands that gave us that hosted us. It's a very beautiful island. It's literally next to Ol Kokwe, and it's so beautiful. It has a lush landscape. It's green and everything, but that's because they decided to conserve the island. They decided to remove the livestock from the island so that they can prevent degradation. They planted trees. They just really took care of that particular island, and over time, in like 5 years, 7 years, the land was completely restored. So it is possible to also have Ol Kokwe have the same transformation if only conservation efforts can be pulled towards the island, and also resources, things like solar, so that people can be able to access electricity and do other things and other activities so that they're not as dependent on the fishing as they are right now.
Coming to the last part the of this interview, looking ahead, like what does the future of Ol Kokwe look like to you? As you've mentioned, you've been there for so long, and you've been there for a while. You've stayed there. So, what does it feel like? What according to you does the future look like?
Wow. So for me, the future is both bleak and hopeful. So the sad part is we have a way of life that is disappearing and a community that is disappearing because most of the time when we talk about climate change, when they go to those big conferences and they talk about climate change, we don't have the frontline communities being there and you're seeing how affected they are. So of course, if the island sinks, we have a whole history that might disappear, and that's a scary thing, right? And you have these women that are adapting and they're saying our way of life could be disappearing. We need to be able to sustain it. So in terms of on one side it's bleak, but on the other side for me it's I think there's something that can be saved with the right partnerships. If some partners can come on board and really help these women execute some of the projects that they think are really core and can help the community, then this community can be able to start being resilient. Yeah. They can be able to start bracing themselves against climate change and whatever is happening. But also, we need to start thinking about displacement because a lot of the hotels where they once stood, a lot of the home and schools where they once stood, they're now submerged. So we have to also prepare for such a reality for this particular island because also there's an island that had elephants, not elephants, sorry, giraffes, and it's submerged, and the giraffes had to be removed from the island. So if such a thing happens, then what next? Um, how can such a community be prepared for displacement? Where will they go? Where will they call home if they live there right now? Because right now that's their home. For some of them, they have been born there, they have lived there. That's all they know. So what other place can be home for them? So these are some of the realities that we need to start thinking about, that the government needs to start thinking about very seriously because it's going to be happening a lot more often as climate. We have Lake Naivasha, which is doing the same. A lot of displacement, a lot of people have had to leave their homes. So that becomes the question that at the same time, it still remains a very beautiful place. We have the tourism, uh, like Ol Island, which is very community focused. There's also other lodges that are coming up within the island and around the lake. And if this particular tourism initiatives could be supported, then it means that in a way, some of this could be salvaged slowly. But also I have talked to some of them and they've said that a couple of years ago, maybe in the 80s, it happened, the water levels really rose and then they drove by themselves. They rose and then they went back down. So they are also hoping that such a thing can also happen because remember, it's not 100% given that it's climate change that is fully responsible for this. So the same way the water is rising, it might also just submerge by itself and go back to the normal level. So they are hopeful that one day something like that will happen and they get to keep their land. So at the moment, we are just observing. We are all observers. We're just observing what's happening to them, but also how they're adapting and what kind of support is needed to help such communities adapt to whatever is happening to them, being at the front line of climate change. Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it is honestly quite upsetting to see how this island is right now sinking. And I really hope that there is much more, much needed intervention that needs to happen here. We will definitely, I personally would also love to look more into the island. And if there's any way that we can support, please do let us know, whether that is through spreading the word and also, just letting people know. And thank you so much, Wavua, for being a part of this. I really, really appreciate it. It was so lovely talking to you. Thank you so much.